Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. My name is Mike Kanakis. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. We're going to be talking with Phil Bossman, who is one of the co-leads of the Research Triangle PowerShell group. Tonight is May the 5th, and we welcome in Phil to talk about application deployment and desktop engineering tricks. Hey, Phil, how's it going?
Good evening. How you doing?
All right, so let's talk a little bit. This topic that you have tonight can be a little open-ended. So frame the scope for me, an AD admin. What are we going to be talking about? Because I talked to you earlier, and I am not currently familiar with the toolkit that you're talking about. So bring everybody up to speed. What are we going to be talking about tonight?
Well, the idea when we first started talking about this topic was, hey, tips and tricks, or just things that a desktop engineer, or even somebody who does desktop engineering, system center stuff, that who things we do with PowerShell and stuff like that. And so in that same fashion, I'm like, well, I can throw in a bunch of stuff together, and I started going down this road of like, I can a little bit of here, a little bit of there, a little bit of there, and I couldn't really come together with the idea of a single topic. Then I could work through that message. And so then I finally found PS app deploy, and it is a framework for deploying applications in PowerShell, and the entire thing is written in PowerShell. So I'm like, well, I could certainly talk about that, and I really kind of want to talk about it, but I also want to explore beyond it and what else it can do beyond what it's really designed to do. And this is a product that was, I'm certainly not the guy who wrote this, or it's just a product that's been out in the community for some years now. It's probably 2012. I think that's when they first started. It's when these guys started 2013, August 2013. And so here I just jumped right into it. And PS app deploy. You had a question?
Well, I was just going to say, so let's do a little bit of a lead in here. So I know you and I talked about this earlier. So this is a toolkit that solves some issues for you at work, but leaves some things you desire that has led you to sort of fill in some gaps that you wish the tool had. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
So that I would certainly talk about that later, in the idea that that this doesn't do everything I want it to do, but the magic of being PowerShell, I can get it to do other things as well. And so in that fashion.
So in a sense, tonight's going to be about this toolkit that you use, right? That has helped you solve some issues. And then at some point, maybe you'll get into a discussion about, hey, I found some weaknesses or some things I wish I could do, and I was able to extend it a little further. So for the viewers at home that may not be familiar with our user group and you and I, talk a little bit about your background and why you have a need for this kind of tool.
Well, I've been in the industry for I don't know, since '96. I've been doing IT for that long, and then grew up and been using PowerShell since version Monad 2, version 2, when it really got its feet under its wings. And then I've been in the started off in the desktop side, where I was doing desktop imaging. I was actually making images. Then I almost say graduated, but I got transitioned into thin clients. Thin clients took me to server administration. Server administration took me to Citrix, and that's me right now. My main role right now is a Citrix architect right now, and so that's what I do on a permanent role. But because I've come through that pipeline, I have experience all the way back there. So I give advice and assist people in those roles as well. And so doing OS deployments, using MDT, using SCCM, all that other stuff, other application deployment toolkits, basically, like Avanti and PDQ. All of those tools kind of basically allow you to manage and support an infrastructure from that perspective. And so I've been in that space for a long time. So right now in Citrix world, people are like, oh, just app delivery, but it's a little bit more than just app delivery. You're managing the servers, you're managing the applications, and you're managing the end nodes themselves. So you're touching the entire stack. And so that's really, what my role has been in the past, and where got my teeth.
And so I met Phil a few years ago by coming to this user group as a regular member, and then then going on to a leadership role and helping Phil run the group. Phil has been a leader of this group for some time. And one of the great things about Phil is that he's one of those guys that everybody knows someone like this. His title does not really accurately depict what his function is at work. He's sort of a guy where many different people come to him for help to get solutions done for many different things. So we talked about Citrix engineer, client, and server, but Phil is also involved in Active Directory and SQL and other things because he's a guy that has a lot of knowledge and has a lot of ability to take a various set of tools and figure out a way of them working together, which is kind of a good lead in to what this talk is about tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll turn it over to you here and let you go from there. But so for those, not familiar, that's the lead in. This is a little bit of a loose talk from a guy who does a lot of different things and has a lot of different use cases. So we'll go
Yeah.
from there.
So where we're going with that is that the idea is like, hey, let's kind of talk about something you do in a day. And so I tried to put together like an outline of all of those things. And as I said before, I felt it was so sporadic, it was all over the place that it wasn't be a good message. And that this is at least something that I can talk to and I've used, in the past. And then when Mike was saying is when I was trying to, hey, I don't necessarily want to, talk to PS app deploy and here it is and how to use it and hey, like it's the greatest thing. It's kind of like a sales pitch. That's not what I want to even accomplish at this point. Is I want to give you an idea of what it is. Then I want to kind of talk through some of the decisions there, but then how you can use it and then take away that its value from it. And I think one of the power functions within PowerShell is the fact that it is nothing more than just basically scripts all over the place. And so as I'm sitting here and going and doing stuff with the toolkit, hey, well, I'll get to it later. So I don't want to jump ahead at this point. And so first of all, what is PS App Deploy? App Deploy is a framework, okay, that will give you a GUI interface. So here's a good example of, hey, I want to do an app install and please close the following applications and defer some stuff. It will give you some other GUIs, screenshots kind of thing. Hey, this is their marketing, this is their web page. So if you're looking for the application, it's basically PS App Deploy Toolkit, and then you can download it. It's in GitHub. So that's the best part is we've gone through some discussions in the past. You can look back at our past meetings about how to basically clone a repository, download the repository, and do all that kind of stuff at this point. So I'm going to defer you back out to that. So the latest version is 3.4. They are, from the website, they're looking to do some more stuff in the future. Actually, no, it's from here. Down here, there's a to-dos.
So just extracting what you said from that. So this is an open source toolkit.
Correct. It's certainly open source, managed by a smaller group of people. Yep.
Okay, so this solves the need for people who need to deploy software who may not have the budget or the wherewithal to go out and buy one of the commercial products that requires a lot of money and subscription and licensing to get started.
No. Well, yes and no. So this is not a admin studio. It is not something like from Flexera. It is not an app packager. So this doesn't really package applications. So it can do some of that. It's a framework that does that. So let's just get into the weeds then. So if you're looking for the bits to get it, one of the easiest things to do is to fork it into your own Git repository. Then you can work with this. And so as I make changes to the code and push it back up to mine, you can then do pull requests. And so that is an option for you. So that's kind of where I'm here at this point, is that it's all managed in Git. And so I'm going to just jump into VS Code, and then we're going to talk about it from here. And so here in GitHub, I actually put it in a GitHub folder. And when you download it from PS App Deploy Toolkit, here's their entire repository. Okay, you get your docs and here's your examples. But the meat of the application is in this folder called Toolkit. So which has 3 files, basically a PS1 and 2 exes themselves, or an exe plus the config, and then the config of the toolkit. So there's some branding stuff. The meat of it is this main PS1, then some additional functions, and then extensions. But then there's also a config file. So we'll get into a lot of those details. I'm just going to skim over it at this point, what these are. So you have some branding icons and PNGs. So you can brand this thing as you want to in that fashion. So I'm gonna jump out real quick and we're gonna talk about the toolkit itself. So what is this toolkit and what is it, why are there a bunch of files in that kind of fashion? And so when you, actually I'm gonna do it this way. So scroll to the top. Hey, this is PowerShell. So they were good enough, and this is written by Sean and Dan, and here's who the author. So I want to give them credit because these guys did a really good job to start with. So you can simply run. So the idea of the application deploy toolkit is that you can deploy applications as a separate install. So instead of actually creating like a setup installer. So in my past days of application deployment, we would, hey, use Flexera, and we would actually wrap the entire application, and we would profile the application. We'd create an exe and a binary, and we'd set that out. That'd be one way to do it. In this fashion, well, you deploy an actual folder. So you would deploy this entire folder toolkit, and the exe that you'd run is basically deploy application.exe with some command line arguments if you need so, and then it would do the rest of it. So you will add the binaries and the bits that you need. And so you'll add the installer files. You can install any files that you might need. If you need an XML file or anything you need to add to it. So you would then package this entire piece up together. This itself would be the package itself. All right, so come back to where we were talking about. The reason there is an exe right here, and then there's also a PS1, is you can call this from as described in the help here, you can call it straight from PowerShell. So we call PS1 with the document deployment type along with the deployment mode. And so it will just do that install. Or if you're using SCCM or if you're using like an Avanti deployment, they don't like basically just, hey, you can't just run a PS1 and that's an installer. That just doesn't work that way. So they actually just wrapped the whole application in just an exe. So there is a service exe that does some, this is kind of inside baseball, but if you're doing like SCCM or something to that effect, you need an exe that you're running. And so there are certain things happens when it's running under system or if it's not. So all that kind of plays into, so if you're a desktop engineer or deployment engineer, you certainly know those things. But effectively, this allows you to give you just an exe. So long as you package your secondary files with it, it will just run the entire thing. And it has command line options. Deployment type allows you to say, hey, default to install, but you can do install, uninstall, repair. So those are your deployment types. Then there's the deployment mode. So what it means, hey, are you going to be interactive? Do you want to be silent or non-interactive? It means completely silent. So it means you're running this in a non-interactive mode. So you're running a system which there is nobody logged in at all. And so there's a different ways in which you do it. And so from a deployment perspective, those are kind of the core. So that's really what you need to find out at this point. So that is the core at this point of what app deployment is. Now you go, well, that doesn't help, or that's all nice and good. What does that really mean for me overall? All right. So here's what we have. I'm going to go through. I was going to go through this idea of actually, demoing this, but I think it's a lot easier, and you don't need to sit and watch me, create files and do stuff. So I actually just created a couple pre-packaged files. So this Orca file. So Orca is people who work in that space know what Orca is. Orca allows you to open and work with MSI files. So an MSI is just a database with a bunch of pieces inside of it. You can open up an MSI and you can metafy stuff, you can add it, and you can really tear it apart, make templates, transforms, stuff like that with Orca. So, but it's just a really small tool. So, hey, but it is an MSI file. Hey, just something really small that I can send an MSI to. So all I did was I created this folder called files, created a folder called support files, so that if I'm packaging this whole thing up, here's just some support files. I put in the MSI that I need, and then we're going to come and modify this deployment.ps1. So we're going to come out here. We're going to look at what I've done to this app deployment PS1. So this is an exact copy of what was in Toolkit. And all we're going to do now is we are going to hold on just a second. So first thing we're going to do is when you get this new file, what you do is you scroll down and you define some variables for this installer. So I'm going to say, hey, it's from Microsoft, who it is. And so the reason why we do this, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes, is we're going to define some variables, okay, to define the application you're trying to deploy. So this is where you would then, this is my script. So if I'm modifying this over time, you can do some version controls, what we changed, what we built it, that kind of stuff. Because effectively what you're building here is an installer script, okay? So there are, as we described before, we're going to scroll down some more. We're find editor variables. Now there is a new section for one for installations, one for uninstalls, and one for repairs. So we're going to come down to the installation section. There's, again, this is very flexible in the fashion that you can do a pre-installation section, you'll do a install section, and then a post-install if you need them, or post-install there. So all we're going to do is going to say, hey, we're going to execute an MSI, the install action on that MSI. That's all we're going to do. So that's what we've done here. Then we're going to keep going down. Hey, there's an uninstall section. Well, how do we do in the uninstall? We go to MSI action uninstall MSI and go from there. And it is as simple as that. So we're Orca. We're going to install interactively. And here we go. And it is now installing. And hey, look what I get. I get this nice dialog. You can see the install happening behind me, and it's all done. Hey, we got a pop-up notification. So very simply, all I've done is added 2 lines of code, and I changed out some variables, and I got all of that other, call it magic, from this installer. So that's what PS App Deploy gives us. But it also, as you can see here at this point, it gives us a ton of diagnostic information as well. So included inside PS App Deploy is it will generate logs. And actually, I'm just going to jump out to it. Where's the last one I just built? Here it is. So it gives us the logs in a readable format as well. And so, hey, everything that it did an inventory of my system. It told me how much machines it was, the version that I was using. It gave us a bunch of information. And then when it actually did the install, you can say, hey, it showed a tooltip when it closed the execute. And where's the MSI? Execute MSI. So here it did the install. So effectively for free, I got a bunch of scaffolding. I got a bunch of resources that allowed me to do a professional install beyond just, hey, I just ran an MSI from clean. And that's really some of the magic in which it does it, is that with very little effort, I now can give my end users a dialogue that I wanted. So if I am now working, so I did this from a command line, right? But I can just as easily do the exact same installer. Actually, I'm doing an uninstall. Here we go. So we're going to do the uninstall, but we're going to run the exe version of it. And so now there's nothing in the dialog that's happened here. Because we left it as interactive, we're going to see the interactive uninstall. Here it says uninstall. So if I had SCCM and we clicked on, hey, in our package manager, hey, I'm going to do this install, we can give that user some dialogue. I can change this branding as I talked about before. We're going to see this picture. We're going to see, so you can change that branding. You can change this notification as well. Or you can simply do the same thing again, just actually, that's the one thing I don't like about it, is that it will do it because it's the exe, it won't tap complete, but I can just do it just as easy. So we'll just do the install all over again. We can go back to the log folder. And actually we can, if we catch it long enough, and it already finished. I didn't get a chance to catch it. But here, you know what, just for funsies, we're gonna go to that same log file. We'll watch it down here and we'll do the uninstall again. The reason I like on the Orca is that it installs and uninstalls really fast. And we can watch it uninstall. And there it goes, it's doing uninstall, it's done, and it's now done. So real simple, that's kind of the thing. So people, you know, may have asked in the past, hey, so I have to use all these extra files just to get me that. Why is that beneficial? We kind of talked about at this point. It gives us these extra logging, okay, created as a centralized logging. So actually, let's talk about some of that logging kind of extra stuff. So some of the stuff you get there. So I'm going to jump to Orca 2. So this is an exact copy of what Orca was, but I've now come into the deployment toolkit, and I'm going to change some stuff here at this point. So there's this config file. Okay, now with the config file, there are things that the software or the toolkit has been designed to use. And so here at this point, that log folder we talked about that I was jumping to, well, that's configurable too. So we can centralize all your log files of how you're doing installs. There's an option here to say, hey, does this installer require admin rights? You can define it here. That way later on, you won't have to check for it. If you're doing some installer of some MSI, oh, this MSI requires admin installs, you can simply at build time say this won't run without admin rights. Where else did I want to talk about here? So whether you can press the files, it will generate these log files, but then how big are they and do they roll and that kind of stuff? We certainly want to talk about that. You can change out your branding stuff and how big the branding is going to go. So again, that is where this config file is where you're going to manage that. One of the other things is what's really kind of cool too, is that they define, hey, they've kind of later, a lot of these messages that they present to the user. So some of those things that we saw before, hey, installing application, uninstalling application, that's all can be configured in XML so that you can, change the language. You can say it in, I don't know what language. Oh, this is Dutch, Danish, and then French and such. And this comes in the box as it is. So when we're talking about languages, one of the other things we saw is here. So there is an option here for balloon tooltips. Hey, so we kind of got some of those installers. Here, I wanted to just jump out here and not show that the dialog box. So because I got a bing, bing every single time it did an install, I don't really care. Just show the user and keep on going. So that is at least another option. And so some of these timeouts, the tool, you can certainly reach in here and figure out or explore more what it can do for you. But what are the options they've given at that point? And then it's playing into the registry. Actually, at this point, this is a good point too, because it throws stuff into the registry or for deferrals, and we'll get to that in a minute. So any other questions at this point? What is Orca? How do you control it? So actually, hold on, we're gonna do an install of, we do number 2, we did an install, and we're gonna do it interactively. And you notice here, I'm just going up again. I could run the exact same command line, and it's going to do whatever's in this folder, not that folder. So I don't get the pop-up. I don't get the balloon tip. That's really all I did. And you didn't really notice it in the background, but it was doing some other stuff behind the scenes. So just as simple like that, I just copied a folder, changed an XML file, and now I have a completely different installer. Any questions? Or does that sound interesting?
So there are some people that are unfamiliar with some pieces of what you're talking about. So a little background information here. CM Trace is a new tool to some of the people who are in attendance.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you do it now or later, maybe you can just give people a look at what CM Trace is.
So CM Trace is a component of the configuration toolkit, configuration management.
Yeah, so Adil is here and he had put that in the link to it in the chat.
Okay, it's in the chat. Okay, so in that manager toolkit is CMTrace is one of those. The reason I like CMTrace is it is a log viewer, but it also, none of my logs are going to have errors in it. So if it actually the line had failed or error, if it failed, it would highlight this line. It's yellow. And if it said error in it, it would highlight. And it does some, as you can see at this point, it does these formatting for things. So it's designed for configuration manager, but I actually install it across my environment, and I use it as the default log viewer. So any log files, it sorts this way. And so, actually, do I have any other logs? No, these are SCCM logs, but the idea is that it just looks differently, and it will sort them out differently. That's CMTrace.
So, and then there's a few people that are commenting in here that Microsoft looks like they've replaced CMTrace with a new tool called OneTrace.
That's possible, but I've only used CMTrace. So then,
yeah. All right. So now some people have an idea of that tool. Just think of it as like a low effort log parser. You just throw a log at it, and it formats the log into a readable format for you, and we'll do some simple color coding without you having to do anything.
The other thing that I really like about CMTrace is that it will follow. It will follow if you're on the last line of the file,
like a tail.
Mm-hmm. So if I was on this line, you know, it's here, and it would go down. It would scroll, and then you'd see the scroll bar moving up and down as it moving. But if I was on the last line, it would then follow. It would then tail down, so I can watch it. So, you know, I can do it. Oh, I'm in the install log. Let's just jump out to the log. My log files. Let's go back to the uninstaller. And so long as we're on the last line, then we'll go and we'll do the uninstall. And we say non-interactive. Oh, no interactive, non-interactive. And we'll see, it'll watch, we'll be able to watch it go down.
And as you're doing this, Adil is pointing out that this is functionality that's possible within PowerShell with just doing get content and a wait command with tail.
Correct. So, did I do something wrong? Or maybe I'm watching the wrong log file. I think I'm watching the wrong log file. Because I have a bunch of them that I've been playing with them. I didn't do a whole cleanup before we started here. So either way, so yes. So, but to Adil's point is this is not something that I'm going to get to the idea that a lot of this you can do in PowerShell. This isn't doing stuff that you can't do other places, or this is also not something that you can't do in other functionality, or don't even say a better thing. Like better is so subjective as to, you know, somebody's better than others. Is a lot of people use this and are out in the environment, the desktop engineering SCCM world, just straight up because it allows them to do something. It's one of these things. It gets the job done. I don't need it to do anything more than just this, or it gets me from point A to point B. That's all I really care about. I just need a simple installer.
Hey Phil.
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to say, yeah, you're totally right. Use the best tool for the job. I use CMTrace myself a lot, digging through into management extension logs even. I was fully just trolling for the rest.
No, we're good. But I'm even expanding that into this tool. So to the other point is that there are certainly a lot of other package managers, and there are certainly other tools to effectively package up applications. Like, you know, hey, you work for Chocolatey, and Chocolatey can do some of this. Hey, stick it all in a NuGet package, and you can add your scripts there. That works too. Along with, hey, you can throw the whole thing wrap it your own into an MSI as a whole. And so there's only one. You're just installing an MSI, and it does all the work for you. But that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of overhead that you're going to pull on. But everything has its own overhead, and that's what I wanted to kind of talk about at this point.
Yeah, I love PSF to for the record. It's really good and efficient tool, and a good way to sort of get your feet wet with the stuff too, and dig in and get to be able to do stuff easily for sure.
Yep. All right, so let's jump into kind of a different version. Hey, I just grabbed Firefox, and so we could do an install of Firefox. And one of the things with this Firefox I want to do, hear me launch my IE just in the background. I'm going to stick it over here. Actually, I'm going to stick it over there. So one of the other things that again, all this stuff is pretty much the same. hey, I did an entire copy of this toolkit folder. I created this files folder. I created the support folder. There's really nothing in it, but we'll see what's in it going to be later. And then I just started modifying this deploy.app. Okay, I add some content here. Then I'm going to scroll down to the installation section. And one of the functions is that we can start up a welcome message, but then we can also say, hey, I need to make sure that these applications are closed in order for my installer to go. All right, I'm going to allow the user to then defer this install up to 3 times. I'm also going to do some, disk checking to make sure that there's enough disk space on the machine, and whether you want to allow the user to be able to defer or not, or do you just want to close the application. And so again, with this toolkit, they've written a basically commandlet function that will allow you to do that. They want to put it all on the same line, but we're going to splat this thing together. All right. And then there's this other option here that says minimize windows. So if you don't turn that on, it will basically just minimize all the windows and bring you to the front instead of everything else. But I don't necessarily like that. So why I'm talking about this is that inside the pre-installation section, I added this little welcome message like, hey, before we start the install, we want to actually do some checking work. And then we want to die here, or we want to make sure we can continue on. And then the install looks just like we did before. Okay, I'm going to come here and I'm going to say install this MSI. And where's that MSI? It's the one we installed over there. All right, we'll go down a little further. Oh, you know what? In the post install, we're going to do some funny stuff. We're going to say, hey, we're going to add the icon to the desktop. All right, we can do that kind of stuff. It's going to be a simple copy file. Copy this file from that location to that file. So this is just PowerShell. We can add 90 lines here. We can do less. All right. So we're going to keep going down. Hey, when you're doing your installs, especially when you're doing the new version of like SCCM or other tools, even with Avanti, again, if you're working in a software deployment model, that they usually like to keep the installs right next to the uninstalls. So if you can install this, tell me how to uninstall it too, so I can take things away. Right? So the same thing. Well, as far as Firefox is concerned, it's actually, you can't just uninstall the MSI because the MSI is actually a wrapper of the exe. So you actually have to use an exe in order to uninstall it. So that's kind of a funny thing that at least I wanted to throw in there and say that is possible, and just know that that's there. And then we're going to do some cleanup, and we're going to clean up the icons we're doing at that point. I didn't do anything inside the repair section. We just left it blank. We just didn't do anything here. And then to keep on going on. So actually, let's go look and see what that looks like. And while we're doing that, how about we answer any questions if we need to?
So we have a pretty active chat going tonight. Just want to encourage the people that are here, just like Adil did just a few minutes ago. If you have a comment, something you want to add, or a question you want to ask Phil, please feel free to jump in. You don't have to keep it to the chat. And just remember, if you have a question, probably someone else has the same question. So please don't feel awkward asking questions. That's what the group is about. But so far right now, Phil,
yep,
the chat is handling itself.
Good to go. All right, so we can see, we got this standard message. You notice some of this text, you probably didn't read it fast enough, but a lot of this text that we see was all inside that config file. And this dialog box, hey, here we are. This is the exe we need to close. We have a deferral that we can do, and you could also later on defer to a time, but we're going to say, nah, I don't want to do that install. And then at this point, the installer, the log file, we're going to say the person deferred, and we close the application. And so that goes back to SCCM, or others said the return code that came back to the controlling application says, I know that the user deferred this application. We need to do the install again. So we come back later on, an hour later, let's do the install again. So in those installers, and hey, look, now it knows that I 2 more deferrals. So it's holding a running count. And if I go look at my registry, I'll actually see those installs. Software. It says, hey, I can defer 2 more times. And I'm going to defer again. And now I can defer 1 more time. So it's actually holding on to that data for me. And so it knows when people are doing stuff. And so this is coming for free at this point. So at this point, this is open, and I'm like, screw it. I'm ready to go close those applications for me. So it went and it closed that application for me, and now it's going to start my install. And you notice too is that I stuck this installer over here so that I could see this here. I want to show the user that this, but I can actually move this dialog box around as I want to. So that is one of the things. Actually, you know what? Why did I put that there? I know why I put that there. Is you'll notice that here you can specify the Windows location inside the box, inside this application, inside PSF deploy. It only give you one option, two options, but I can put it dead center, I can put it up at the center, or I can put it in the bottom right. But I'm like, I want to put it somewhere else. So this is just nothing more than PowerShell. I simply came in here to the main, and I found the section where it talked about window height, and I came here and go, hey, let's just do the top right. I added this one line of code to there at line 7060. And then I went to the top and actually top, let me do copy format. I'm gonna go the other way. And then I added it to the validate set. And so very simply, I jumped in and I made this product do differently than what it's designed to in the can. And so that's why before when I said if you're going to use this tool, it's best to fork your own copy, do any modifications, because the best value is to actually contribute back. So if I needed to, I could write this back up. Hey, this now supports the top right of the installer. Any dialog boxes in the top right now, at least this version of it. And because it is contained within its folder, that this is its own copy, which is different than Orca. Like this version doesn't support that because this is not a copy. So it's kind of a benefit, but it's also one of those that keeps it kind of self-contained. So I always wanted to bring that up as well. I know it's kind of inside baseball, but it is one of those values. So the last kind of example I wanted to bring up at this point is, these were kind of like simple installers, and Orca, Firefox, people see that, hey, I can do some deferrals. I wanted to give you an example of something that is more more complicated. So yeah, I'm in the Citrix world. This is one of the latest ones we've built. This is a Citrix Workspace app installer. Okay, so it also requires Uniprint. So here's one of these support applications. So this is an extra secondary application, and for people who don't know. So people probably know what Citrix is. This is the Citrix client, but there's a product called Uniprint, and it basically allows you to do remote printing or defer printing down to the client. And so I don't need to install like client printers on inside the servers, and I don't have to manage printings. I can just one printer, and it will create effectively PDFs that render down to the client. And so it allows us to have a unified printer across my entire Citrix environment without having to manage printers. So that's kind of a different world. But I wanted to come back to, hey, create these, add these folders, add these files, and then the only file that I'm now modifying is this deploy.application, and here's where we can play with this. All right, so everything looks the same. I add all my fields here. So the reason that we're using these fields again is so that the log file that we're talking about, this is where it's really recorded. All right, so let's go to the install section. Hey, we're doing a install log. We have execute process. Now, I was expecting somebody to jump out and say, hey, I've seen this execute process, this execute MSI. That's not really like standard inside of PowerShell. It's not really PowerShellish. It's actually inside of PS app deploy. But why would I use that versus execute start process? Excuse me, not execute process. So why would I not use execute process? Why would I use execute process instead of start process? Well, the fact is that these are PS app deploy centric, and so all that logging that we got for free, basically it conforms to that same standard. And the same thing with this execute MSI. I can then define the install action, and based on other command line other configuration changes, I can say what the status of those installs are. How does it log? Does it log verbose? Does it not verbose? All of that comes for free for us. So,
I don't know if you're keeping this file. You just edited 131. You took a space off. You
Oh.
ran together the parameter and the commandlet. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all, I'm not actually going to run this because it's going to take like a couple of minutes, and this is actually, a running machine with Citrix on it. So I'd have to do the uninstall first, and then it'd be just a pain. So we're not actually going to run it, but I wanted to actually show what, the fact our first example just said, hey, just a simple MSI install. But this is going to be something, this is a real world thing. This is what you typically do in bigger packages, is they're going to do a couple, chain a couple installs together. You're going to do some logic about which to do. So here, this is the single install for both 64 and 32-bit, but then based upon which one MSI we have to run, because it's not centric. So we have to do some logic there. So that's also one of the values of, having it in PowerShell, is that you can run whatever kind of logic you want. Any questions? So we're going to jump again to post install. Again, I just use the same install progress. We can say where it's going to go. We can change the text. I don't know if I kind of mentioned that at this point. We saw that text, but we can continuously update that dialog box as it was going. So before we had, the default, which is just installing. Then we came here and said, hey, installing the specific tools. Then later on, it's just going to refresh that dialog to say, hey, configuring the registry. And kind of like we talked before, this set registry key is unique to PS app deploy, and it allows us to actually use HKey local machine instead of HKLM, kind of, instead of using like the colon and that kind of thing. It does all that kind of magic for you. And so it just allows you, it's more visible to read. Now, granted, it's not really PowerShell-ish, but it's kind of offloading some of that work for you. And then the same thing here is they have this whole thing, which again, this is more people who work with software installs across the board, is that you need to add this to everybody's HKey user. Well, this is kind of a wrapper function that will allow you to write this to every single person's HKey local user, HKey current user. So inside everybody's profile, you will write this value to everybody's profile, who's ever on the machine. Then here we are running again, then we do, and then a simple copy. So this idea that we can chain a bunch of functions together and do it. It's like just another PowerShell script. So we go to the uninstall, we do the same thing. Hey, this is just the reverse. We're going to do the uninstall using the same exe because it does. These MSIs need to go with an uninstall prompt. And then we do some simple cleanup. This installer, we didn't really care about the registry, so we just left the registry alone, because you don't necessarily, you can always add, but you don't never, you want to be more careful about deleting crap from the registry than just throwing new stuff in the registry. So that is the rough idea. Or any questions on just PS app deploy as a whole, and then I can start talking about what I think is overall PS app deploy.
So this is an opportunity for people in the chat to come back around to anything that we were talking about earlier that maybe you got just a partial answer for, anything in the chat. As I'm watching, you feel I see you mentioned a few tidbits here. It looks like PS app deploy. So I'm an AD admin. This is something I've never used, but very popular with the people in the chat. A lot of people have used this for one thing or another. And I noticed there's a lot of little like add-ons that you called out, like PS app deploy, just as this little wrinkle that makes life a little easier. They're not like wow features, like just like you mentioned, HKLM being expanded or execute process versus start process. Seems like there's a lot of little like easy, well, what would I say, small wins that add up to like a lot of things being easier in the long run by using the tool.
So I think kind of in that same fashion, some people like, another example here is this like that I'm going to jump into. Let me jump to that one. Yeah, I don't care about modifying the file. Is that this is kind of a simpler installer, and actually this is the uninstall. But this installer is nothing more than just unzipping a file and putting it into System32. So call it an installer, call that whatever it is. It's not actually doing anything but unzipping a zip file into the machine. And so we use this quite often just to keep a unified log, so that if I'm going to do a full install using an MSI, I want PS app deploy to have it logged. But then, hey, I want to install some files. I want to just throw a file on the C drive. We'll use this entire piece, it's kind of like heavy-handed just to give us, but then we have a log, we have a similar log that matches with it. So the fact that I ran, this install along with this install and this install, and they all just become the same log, all the logs are in the same place, and the fact that, hey, we just copied some files to this disk. Simple as that. So it is just that simple. So what I wanted to also talk about, any questions before I jump into the next kind of thing? So if you're familiar enough with PS App Deploy, is that you can come in here, but I think it's not very easy to explore. So there are a bunch of applications. There are some people who have written articles about it. So if you look up PSADT, that's how they typically refer to it. If you, Google it, you'll probably find it on the internet, and you can find some articles on how to do it, probably even some YouTube videos. But I'm a PowerShell guy. Like, show me the PowerShell way to do it, right? And so one of the things that actually, let me go back in there. Is that like, show me the help, show me a module kind of thing. So they, inside this config file, is this help. And so they have this help function, is the script that will give us, come on, there it is. But the people who wrote PS App Deploy, a way, and like, here's all the functions we kind of talked about. So we see there was execute MSI, and so here's the PowerShell help for that. So hey, well, how does it work? What are my command line arguments? What is this? Will it do any validation? Is this required? All of that is written full up in PowerShell. So they did a really good job here, but the discoverability can be desired, and that's one thing I don't like about it. But hey, this is PowerShell. I can make this do whatever I want, and the fact that they wrote a GUI web form to do this. So I can't like highlight this. I can't like do anything at that point. And so what I wrote back here is I wrote a module, so I'm going to say import module, PSADT, and PSADT PSM1. Now, all it does is it imports that module that I just had, but now I have get command module PSADT, and there's everything that I just saw. But the PowerShell way. So now I can say, help, execute, what do I want? MSI, there you go. So there's the execute help for MSI. So show me the examples. Hey, this is more familiar. This is what am I expecting? Examples, show window. Show window. Oh, I don't get it this way. There it goes. So then I can throw this onto a different screen, and I can start, then I can dump into VS Code and going, oh, this is what I'm looking for. Gives me my help here. Hey, here's the parameters I'm looking for, that kind of stuff. And so this is something that, if you look at their to-do list inside of VS Code, inside their GitHub package, hey, they want to make it a module, but it's not that. So if you wanted to do that, hey, you'd have to add that to it. And so I'm free to, I'm more than happy to show you how I did this, but I don't think that's key. But the thing is that now I have the ability to, even, figure out those kind of things, and I can then play with this game. Hey, here we are playing games. So that's the last comment I have with PS App Deploy. At least one of the things that is that if you've never seen it before, or you're trying to do some discovery inside of it, is that, hey, it may not do everything you wanted to do. You kind of see that I added some functionality by modifying to move the folder around, the display dialog around, but you can simply look at the code and where they're doing that, follow it, make it do what you want to do, or you know what, I want to get it so that it can show me a module. All right, well then I had to add some other stuff, so now it's a module, or at least it's not a full module, but it's partial a module. So I can't actually run stuff from here, but it at least gives me what I'm looking for, at least some discoverability, some tab complete, and some the help that I'm looking for. So it's not feature complete, but again, yeah, it's where it is. But this at least tells me all the other functions that I can do within PS app deploy. And as you can see here at this point, now we can do measure. There's 82 functions that this group wrote that will allow you to help, hey, doing Windows updates, here's this part, the dialog box, talked about the balloon tips. Hey, so you can write your own balloon tips in that code that you're talking about. Like, hey, you can start popping up stuff for them. You get, but see, the thing is, hey, this allows you to do here, but then you could also just import, toast notifications and other stuff like that. So this also doesn't let you do, everything can be happening in different ways. So this is not a be all end all, and it's PowerShell, so we can make it do and be all whatever we want it to be. So here you go, SCCM task. So it's in the box. So that's my presentation. Any questions?
Dope.
Very
Love it.
interesting stuff. So the boys were talking in the chat. I shouldn't say the boys because Julie is there as well. Our attendees were talking in the chat, and some people were very interested in your little pseudo module you wrote there. So I don't know if there's a way that they can steal that from you.
Well, actually, we'll show the code. That's not a problem either. So pretty straightforward. Just PS manifest. We're going to export everything we got here. Then we go to the, what I did is I then went to the main function. So main has its own thing. So this is what happens when you call, any of the functions within PS app deploy. I'm gonna scroll. So please feel free there. So thinking through what we have here, and here we are. We actually, so inside the main function is all the functions that they include. So I just did copy and stuck it down here and paste. And so now this module is nothing but just a load of function definitions. That's all it's doing. Now here, the kicker is that these functions don't actually do anything, or they won't run independently. So let's show you that, because it's not that part. So you actually get logged on user. It throws a bunch of errors because it assumes that, hey, where you're writing log file is there. It doesn't. I'm not adding any of that stuff inside this module. It's not letting you do that because it can't write to that, because it's all these variables that are inside get logged on user is there. So get. So it's going to try and assume that it's going to try and use this function. We'll get write log. We got to go find that. So let's go find that. Let's see. Function. Right. That should be. It should be. Oh, if I could spell function right. That's why it doesn't work. So this function assumes a bunch of variables already defined. It wants to use all these other variables that are defined in the script source and my invocation script name, a bunch of other stuff. So it assumes that it's inside of PSADT. They've already been defined. So I'm not defining all that stuff. So kind of in that example. So if you see at the very top, at the very beginning of this main, it's creating a bunch of, like system-wide variables that we kind of got for free. I keep saying get for free, but the reason why all of these functions, all this PS app deploy toolkit, it's defining all these functions, and it gives you, or not functions, defining all these variables that it assumes it are in place. But because my module, or this module, just gives me the functions, the raw source of the functions, it can't be used sequentially. But for my purpose, this is enough, because I just want the discoverability. I need to be able to say, hey, what is that function? And if I, again, inside of, let's just come back into like Orca, come here. We're going to come here. And I can't just say, not there, execute doesn't exist here. But now if I can do ps-t or import. Hey, PSAD health. And I think I know somebody who's responsible for that.
It's a crap module. If someone would work on it, maybe.
Yeah. So now that this module is at least loaded into here, I can now do this. I can now do, hey, look at that. And now tab complete works for me, right? And so now I can do all this other fun stuff that I couldn't do other places. And so I can kind of do that discovery here. And so that's really where it came to me. It's like, hey, I just want to be able to write my code here and do some discovery. And otherwise, I have to know what all this stuff is. And so if I now have this, just load this module side by side, I can now do, show installation progress, window message, PSAT is the bomb, right? Whatever. Boom. Right. And then we're going to say the window location. And I added top center. Oh, see, these are what you get in the because it's not, we're in the Orca. We're not using my modified version, so we don't have top right. So bottom right, right? So now put it in bottom right now. And actually save. Oh, it's the uninstall section. And now just as easily, we're in Orca. Deploy. And I want to watch the whole thing. Uninstall. I say interactive. I have to put interactive there, otherwise it assumes like this is designed to be run, or assumes like SCCM is running it or something like that. So it wants to be a non-interactive. And then we're going to get a message in the middle. And then all of a sudden we're going to get a message down here. Where did I get the message? Did I save? I probably didn't save. But anyway, I think you get the idea at this point. So that's what you got. So if you still want, I can simply, push that up. I'll put that into my GitHub repository, this PSABT. But hopefully you could have. If you have any questions, reach out to me on Twitter or anything, and I'll help you repurpose exactly what that is. And so, yeah.
So one of the interesting things about when Phil sort of gets going with the topics he likes to talk about is his sort of unique perspective, and that's, I think, why many of the people in the community love the PowerShell language so much. Is you can look at a project and you could see kind of where they stopped or where they did something that they thought would be useful, like that help file in a GUI. And, with just a little bit of work, you can sort of build your own version of something that you may feel is like a little bit of deficiency in the original tool. And as Phil said, with the ability to fork and push back up, it's very easy to commit to a project and sort of make the project a little better in the long run by adding in just a little bit of code to maybe help with what you saw as a weakness or a gap in a tool that maybe module builders or the tool builders didn't catch when they built it, or maybe they had plans to do in the future and just didn't get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that it is PowerShell, it's not beyond someone's abilities to come and figure out what it is. So I came here and going, what do we got here? There's show help console. Like, what is this? Oh, it's a win form of some kind. They're just drawing a bunch of stuff. I'm like, well, where's the list of commandlets? And then I finally found it. I'm like, oh, it's right here. Oh, like not there. So it's right here. So they come here. This is how they're doing it. So they're listing all their functions. They're just saying get command of functions where, hey, where they know they're already in the function, but then give me everybody where it's me, and then they do and they exclude my stuff. My module didn't do that because they have some internal functions. So there's not, and they just select out the name. And that's how they build that list on the left. I'm like, okay, well, I can do this again. So I started off with that, but I was like, I want the internal functions too. So it's possible. With some work, you can get to the stage of, effectively reverse engineering what's there. And ultimately, because you have your own forked copy of it, you can make it whatever it is you want. I think we kind of talked. There is a functionality for extensions. So they created this function unzip, but you can add your own. So they put a place to add your own separate from theirs. And you can do that here too. So there is some, they did a lot of great stuff here. So I don't want to, anybody think that I'm knocking it at all, but they did a really good job. Good job, excuse me. But again,
so Phil, don't get don't be wondering about your talk from a quiet group here. This has been one of the most active chats in the last few months that we've had. We happen to have a knowledgeable group of people, so I think a lot of questions haven't made it to you because 4 or 5 people have been able to jump in and sort of answer questions or give their unique sort of spin on it. So with that being said, go ahead,
just to prove that that people don't bite, Phil, the modifications that you made and so on, that's up in your GitHub, right?
So no, but I can add those up to my GitHub. So I only made like a couple of modifications and see that what I typically would do is where I've made those modifications have been into the package itself, because again, each toolkit folder, like this whole folder is unique to itself. It doesn't share.
I think I was talking more about the help, about getting the help into the way that you did.
Yeah, I can absolutely put that. I'll do that. So I will push this as a PS80T help module up there. So yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're going to make a final call for questions here. I know many people have gotten their questions answered in the chat. For the people that are watching at home on YouTube, you're not going to be able to see that chat. I apologize for that. But we're going to wrap this up here in a few minutes. Give everybody a last chance. And I just want to comment for our users that are catching us on YouTube, in that you may not be familiar with the user group. User group meets twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of the month, and it's an open group. You don't need to have any skill set or any prerequisites to come and join. So if you enjoy these topics that you're seeing on our YouTube channel, obviously you can consume more on the YouTube channel, but you can join us in person and you can ask your questions and be a part of the live interactive chat. If you're interested in doing that, you can check us out at www.rtpsug.com, or if you're familiar with Meetup, the Research Triangle PowerShell user group, or you can reach out to Phil or myself on Twitter. I'm at Mike Kanakis, and Phil is at Schlauge,
SCHLAUGE.
Yeah.
Schlauge.
So, yeah, that's it. So we would love to have anybody join us, and that's the whole point of this community, is to just present ideas and allow people to participate in here. So anybody have anything they want to wrap up with here before we finish this up? Phil, any closing thoughts or anything?
No, I think, I hope everybody got some value out of it. And if you have any questions, certainly reach out.
Okay, so again, as if you're watching at home, just to give you a little feel as to how this works, we're going to wrap this up for the recording, but we have a discussion that continues afterwards with the user group that doesn't make it to the recording. So we're going to say goodnight to everybody who joined us. We hope you enjoyed this one, and come back and join us for more. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Phil. Great job tonight.